All right, I will say good morning. Let us begin. First, I want to begin by thanking Rabbi Kalman Akiva for giving shir yesterday. Wonderful shir yesterday. A thank you to our sponsors for this morning shir. To thank our TALMUD TORAH sponsors for the month of Adar Beis. To thank Leah Sol for dedicating all of the shiurim and drushos this month in honor of all those who work so hard to make the shul a special place. What a beautiful dedication. Our Daf Yomi sponsor today, Bob Imes, in commemoration of the yahrzeit of his brother, David ben Yaakov Zichron Levracha, and also a shout out to his study partner, to his chavrusa, another member of our shir, Doug Stanger. We thank Bob for his sponsorship, the Neshama Shtav and Aliyah, and the family Einachama. And also with that, let us begin. Today's daf is Daf Chav Gimel. I know you got a little bit further down on Chav Gimel, a couple of lines, but let's just actually back up just to the two dots on Chav Beis Amud Beis. This way we'll just begin the sugya from anew, keep the flow going. So we left off with the following idea. No says hamedrus, no says truma v'alo hakodesh. So remember, we saw the case that halacha l'maisa, one of the interesting distinctions in the Mishnah between truma and between kodesh is that if a person is carrying medrus, so remember again, we've defined medrus as truma that comes about as a result of a zav supporting his weight on something. So the example that Rashi gave in the Mishnah, and we'll see why Rashi gave this example, because the example of the Gemara is the shoe of a zav, right? So a zav obviously supports his weight in his shoe. As a result, ultimately, again, the shoe is Tamei Tumas Medrus. So therefore, the Mishnah said that if a person is going ahead and carrying something which has Tumas Medrus, he can carry Truma, but he cannot carry Kodesh. So the Gemara says, Kodesh, my time alone. Why can't you carry Kodesh? So the Gemara says something amazing. Mishum Maisa Shahaya. Because of a particular story which occurred. Dam Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel. Maisa be'echad Shahaya ma'avir chaves shal yayin Kodesh mimakom lemakom. There's a story of a person who was carrying a barrel of wine, which was Kodesh, right? So again, remember again, Kodesh refers to any item which has sacrificial sanctity. So he was carrying a barrel of wine, which was Kodesh. Top of Chav Gimel, V'nifsika ritzua shal sandalo, and the strap of his sandal snapped. V'notla. So therefore, what happened? If your strap of your sandal snaps, you can't wear the sandal. You have no choice but to carry it. So v'notla. V'henicha al pichavis, and he placed it on top of a barrel. Now remember again, this was the barrel in which he was carrying Kodesh wine. Now both say a couple of things over. Look at Rashi. Rashi says over sandalo, medras hazav haisa. So obviously again, this sandal was Tumas medras, v'notla biyado, umitoch kach nafla la'avir hachavis. Now just to understand what the intention was and what happened. Because sometimes in life it's very important to know. We start out with certain intentions, good intentions. Those intentions don't materialize. And in fact, they end up causing, not the intentions, but the actions. I will say often, the most difficult thing in life is when your intentions don't cause the intended reactions, or your intentions don't cause the intended results. That's often the great challenge in life. So in this case over here, this guy has good intentions. His intentions are to go ahead and place the shoe on top of the barrel. Now Tosas points out we have to be talking about what kind of barrel? An earthenware barrel. Why does it have to be an earthenware barrel? Because an earthenware barrel only becomes tamei from the interior, not from the exterior. So it must have been the following case. He has an earthenware barrel, right? And therefore, again, his goal is to place the shoe on top of the barrel. No problem, right? Because even if the shoe is tamei tumas medrus, ultimately earthenware klicheres only becomes tamei me'aviro, from the interior airspace. So keep the shoe on top of the barrel. This way I could transport the shoe. The wine inside the barrel is totally fine. So what happened? Of course, again, v'nafla la'avir hachavis v'nitmes. What ends up happening? The shoe slips to the interior of the barrel. Whether the shoe falls into the wine or whether the shoe just is hanging in the airspace is the same thing. Once it's in the airspace of a klicheres, the contents of the klicheres become tamei. So therefore, we'll say, so what ended up happening is, well-meaning guy, well-intentioned guy, wanted to be careful, ultimately, again, with the wine inside of the klicheres, shoe slips inside, wine becomes tameh. So I'll say something fascinating happens here. Ba'osa shah amru. In that moment, Chazal were gozer. And what was the gzera? What did they say? Hanosi es hamedris, nosi es hatruma, avalo es hakodesh. So I'll say in that moment they made a decree. What was the decree? That if you're carrying an item that has tumas medris, you can go ahead and carry along with it truma, but you cannot go ahead and carry along with it kodesh. So I will say this was their gzera. They will say what's fascinating about this is that, remember again, it sounds like from the Gemara, how many times did this happen? Right? Now, I'm sure it happened more than once. But it wasn't like everyone and their brother was dropping their tummy shoe into a barrel of Kodesh wine. Right? So remember, the thing to remember with all of this is as follows, which is that you see clearly that the theme here is that Chazal go the extra mile in preserving the sanctity and holiness of Kodesh. This is all, right? This whole sugya is about chumras regarding Kodesh that we take to preserve the sanctity. As we said again 2 days ago, the holier something is, the more sensitive it is to tumah. The holier something is, the more precautions we take to maintain its proper sanctity. So the Gemara says, okay, I understand the gzera, ihachi trumanami. So why not go ahead and also include truma? In other words, why don't you say that halacha l'maisa, same way that you can't carry something that has tumas medris along with kodesh, you also can't carry something that has tumas medris along with truma, right? To which the Gemara says, Hamani Bosi, this is absolutely fascinating. Because whose opinion does this reflect? Rabbi Chananya ben Akavya. This is Rabbi Chananya ben Akavya. Then I will say, now what does Rabbi Chananya ben Akavya say? Da'amar lo asru ela biyardein ubisvina because Rabbi Chaim ben Akavya holds that they were only gozer on a boat on the Jordan River, just like what occurred. Okay, what are you talking about? Maihi. So before we go on, just take a quick look at Rashi, because Rashi helps to frame this. Rabbi Chaim ben Akavya, Da'amar komakom shegazru chachamim al davar maisa shahaya. Shekol makom shegaz. Kamakum shegazru chachamim al davar al maisa shahaya lo gazru ela kidugmas hamaisa ukiosa davar hilchach b'kodesh chaya maisa b'kodesh gazru. But Rabbi Chaim ben Akavya says something which is so fascinating, which seems to normally fly in the face of the way we see how Chazal legislate their laws. Rabbi Chaim ben Akavya said that when Chazal make a law, they only make their law to mimic and to mirror the exact scenario which gave rise to the problem. They both say, why is this fascinating? This is fascinating because generally we like to think that when Chazal institute a halacha, they institute it in what we call a low plug. Low plug means we don't distinguish between this case and that case. We create a halacha, create a framework, and the framework applies. Rabbi Chananya ben Akavya has an alternate version of this, and in his version, no. Chazal only make halachas or gzeros regarding specific scenarios, and therefore their gzeros only apply to specific scenarios. We'll tie this back in just a moment, but where does Rabbi Chananya ben Akavya say this? Listen to this. Mahi disanya. Both say this is such a fascinating case. Lo yisa adam mechatos ve'ifer chatos ve'yavirim biyardein ubisvina. So let's listen to this. A person should not carry mechatos. Remember again, mechatos is the actual mixture of ashes of paraduma with the spring water. Efer chatos refers to the ashes of the paraduma. A person should not carry these items, right? Ve'yavirim biyardein ubisvina, should not carry them across the Jordan River or in a boat. V'lo yamod bitzad zeh, v'yizrekim l'tzad acher. Nor should you take ashes of paraduma or water paraduma and throw it from one bank of the river to another bank of the river. V'lo yishitem al pnei hamayim. Nor should you float them across the water. V'lo yirkav agabe behema. You also shouldn't put paraduma, water or ashes, on the back of an animal. V'lo al gabe chavero, nor on the back of your friend. Ele imkin haya raglov nogos bekarka. I will say, rather, again, halacha l'maisa, the Tanakam, the first opinion says over here, the only way to transport ashes or water of paraduma is with your own koach and with your feet planted on the ground. All right? Aval ma'avir agabe agesher. But what can you do? You could transport paraduma paraphernalia, right? Either again water or ashes over a bridge. Ve'ino choshesh. Right? So we'll say. So by the way, why does that have to add in the bridge? Because technically speaking, the bridge is that my feet planted on the ground, right? On one hand, again, it's going over the air, right? It's a bridge, right? But Lemaisa, the Tanakama says, no, that's called having your feet firmly planted on the ground. Echad hayardein ve'echad sharanaros. And I will say this gzeira applies both to the Jordan River as well as to any other body of water. Now take a look at Rashi. Ela imkein raglav no goes bekarka mishum maise shahaya besvina v'chol svina mahalechas ba'avir the gazru ala aviros kolon. I will say now we're going to get into it in just a moment, but we're going to see that there was an episode where something happened with para aduma ashes on a boat. Okay, that's the story. We'll see it in with greater specificity in just a moment. Tanakama says, therefore, what emerged from that story, which we'll see in just a moment, is Chazal said, when transporting para aduma water or para aduma ashes, you have to transport it in a way where your feet are firmly planted on the ground. See, you can't float it, you can't take it on a boat, doesn't matter what body of water, right? The biggest thing you can't put it on the back of an animal, even on the back of your friend. You have to transport it yourself with your feet firmly planted on the ground. Okay, we'll come back to the sheet in just a moment. The Gemara says, Rabbi Chananya ben Akavya Omer, Rabbi Chananya says, no. Lo asru ella biyardein ubisfino ukemaise shahaya. Rabbi Chananya ben Akavya says, no. The only thing that's asr is you can't transport water or ashes of para aduma on a boat across the Jordan River. That's the only thing you can't do. On a boat across the Jordan River. So in other words, you want to put it on the back of an animal, you put it on the back of an animal. You want to go ahead and put it on a boat, take it on a boat across the Indian Ocean, that you could do. You just can't do it on a boat across the Jordan River. Now both say, it's so intriguing. What happened, right? That's what we want to know. What happened over here? So we'll say, watch this. So the Gemara says, my maise shahaya. What was the story, right? What is it that occurred? My Maisa Shaya. Then Rabbi Yehuda Rav, listen to this. Maisa ba'adam echad shaya ma'avir mechatas ve'efer chatas biyardina besvina. One time there was a guy, we'll just call him Reuven. So Reuven is going ahead and transporting water or ashes of para aduma. And what happened? He was transporting it on the Jordan River, biyardin ubesvina, and on a boat. And what happened? V'nimtza Kizayis meis tachov bekarki isa shel safina. And what did they find? They found the kizayis of a corpse on the bottom of the ship. It happens, right? It happens. So I'll say, so now what happened? So now we have a real problem. What's the problem? They just found the kizayis of a mace, right? And remember again, a kizayis of a mace has the ability to convey tumas mace, right? Avi avos hatoma, which now means the entire para aduma, invalid. Which I will say is a very, very, very big deal. A very big deal. Because remember again, water, ashes, by the way, when I say water, water is the mixture of the water and the ashes versus the ashes by themselves before being mixed with the water. Remember again, we all know that para aduma is a rare commodity. So a notion of a batch of para aduma becoming invalid because of contact with corpse tuma is a major issue. So therefore we'll say, what happened? What happened? Now again, this is a singular story. Right? This sounds like it happened how many times? Once. But nevertheless, there's a reason why it happened once. Ba'usasha amru lo yisa adam mechatas ve'efer chatas ve'ya'avirim biyardin besina. In that moment, they legislated that a person is not permitted to go ahead and transport the ashes of para aduma in a boat on the Jordan River. So we'll say, so let's pause here for just a moment. So now let's take a step back and look what's happened over here. How do we start, right? How do we start this journey? The Mishnah told us that halacha l'maisa, I am not permitted to transport an item that has tumas medris together with carrying kodesh. Right? So if I'm carrying kodesh, I'm carrying an item of sacrificial sanctity. I cannot go ahead and carry the shoe of a zav. Just to give a simple example, tumas medris. Okay. To which the Gemara says, why not? Why not? The Gemara says, because there was a story. There was the guy. What did the guy do? He was carrying a bottle of Kodesh wine. His sandal snapped. he had a sandal that was Tamei Tumas Medris. Again, remember, he didn't impact the Kodesh wine. Why didn't he impact the Kodesh wine? Let's just get all the facts here. Why didn't he impact the Kodesh wine? Because remember, not simply because it was closed, because closed is not enough. What was the barrel made of? Earthenware, cheres. Remember again, cheres only becomes tamei from its avir, from its interior airspace, not externally. So you could be tamei tumas medris, still transporting that barrel, and everything is fine. Sandal snaps, he puts the sandal on top of the barrel, still, everything fine. What happened? Sandal falls in. Sandal falls in, whether it fell into the wine, into the airspace, it doesn't matter, it's the same thing. Sandal falls into the airspace of the barrel, now the kodesh becomes tamei. In that moment, they said that halacha lemaisa, you can't carry tumas medris together with kodesh. To which again, the Gemara says, so why not truma also? So now we understand, to which the Gemara says, because this Mishnah reflects the view of Rabbi Hananya ben Akavya. What does Rabbi Hananya ben Akavya say? Every single time Chazal were gozer, because of a particular situation, they only apply their gzera to what? To what? To the exact same situation. Where is the shita of Rabbi Hananya ben Akavya from? Para Aduma. Because Rabbi Hananya ben Akavya said there was the story. Everybody agrees with the story. The guy transporting ashes of Para Aduma, it turned on a boat on the Jordan River. There's a kizayis of mace in the boat, whole batch is tamei. At that point, from that, Rabbi Hananya, so again, the Tanakama said, from that point on, Chazal said, you can't transport ashes of paraduma without your feet firmly planted on the ground. So you can't put it on a boat, on any river. You can't put it on the back of an animal. Rabbi Hananya ben Akavya said, no, the gzera only applies to the same exact case. So what can't you do with waters of paraduma? You can't take them on a boat in the Jordan River. So our Mishnah reflects the view of Rabbi Hananya ben Akavya and says that what can't you carry with Tumas Medris? Only Kodesh. Only Kodesh. It just doesn't apply to Truma because ultimately the story happened with Kodesh and not with Truma. Good. I will say that's the full circle. It is interesting also if you think about it, that in the sheet of the Chachamim, of the Tanakama, by the Paraduma case, what do they say? You can't, the Lashon here is so profound, you can't transport the ashes of the Paraduma, ele imkein raglov nogos bekarka, unless, of course, your feet are firmly planted on the ground. And I will say, what an incredible metaphor for life as well. Paraduma represents Tara, represents purity. You cannot go ahead and achieve a level of purity unless your feet are firmly planted on the ground. So I will say, unless, of course, I have a real plan for life, unless, of course, I have a real vision, unless, of course, I have a real derech, right? If my feet are firmly planted on the ground, I could achieve Tara. I could achieve a high level of purity, a high level of accomplishment. But if I'm floating around, right, I'm on boats, I'm on water, I'm on the back of animals, my feet are not firmly planted, it's impossible to reach a level of Tara. Such an incredible yisod. So the Gemara goes like, Yibailuhu, sandal tamei, Yibailuhu, sandal tamei, sandal tar, mahu, chavis psucha, chavis stuma, mahu. So we'll say, now some interesting, so the Gemara now gives some variations. Look at Rashi. Ibailu sandal tame, hada amrit de gazra alav shelo yisa kodesh imo, sandal tahar mai. Mi gazer sandal tar atu tame olo. So we'll say, here's the interesting shaila. We now know that the gzera ultimately is about a sandal tame. But is there an issue about resting any sandal on top of a barrel? Right? In other words, we should just make a gzera that you shouldn't rest the sandal on top of a barrel of anything, or at least a barrel of kodesh, right? Chavis psucha, chavis stuma. Now remember again, in the story in question, the item fell into the barrel. So halacha lemaisa, we know that the gzera will be on an open barrel. What about on a closed barrel? So you say, obviously, in the story that happened, it must have been an open barrel, because if it was a closed barrel, the sandal would have never fallen in. So we're just asking, how far does the gzera apply? Right? If at the end of the day, the sandal is not tamei, did Chazal say you just can't put any sandal on the barrel? Or what happens again if the barrel is closed? If the barrel is closed, right, where there's no concern that the sandal is going to fall in, can you put the sandal on top of the barrel? So Mahu, Rabbi Ila Amar, Im Avra Vinas, skipped, Avra Vinas Amahu. Both say, what happens? What about the following case? What happens if you're in violation of the gzera? So I will say the gzera, as we know it, is that halacha lemaisa. You can't hold Tumas Medris together with Kodesh. What happens if you did? What happens if you did? Now, let's say in your case, you were careful that the tummy item never came in contact with the wine or in the interior of the barrel, but you violated the edict of Chazal. So what's the status of your Kodesh? So we'll say, interestingly enough, the Gemara only answers the last one. Rabbi Ila Amar, Im Avar Vinasa Tame. Rabbi Ila says, if you violated the edict of Chazal, ultimately, again, your Kodesh is automatically rendered Tame. At least midrabanan. Rabbi Zera Amar Avar V'Nasatar. Rabbi Zera says, no, Allah Chalamaisa, as much as Chazal said, we do not want you carrying Tumas Medras together with Kodesh, but if you did it, and again, the Tameh item never entered the interior of the barrel, then halacha l'maisa, your Kodesh will remain tar. Now, I'll say that is how the Rambam paskins, that although there is a rabbinic gezerah not to carry an item that is Tameh Tumas Medras together with Kodesh, at the end of the day, if you did so, and there was no interior contact, your Kodesh remains tar. Incredible. Kelim hadig maram betara. So both says, remember again, the next part of the Mishnah was, this is all really fascinating cases. This was if you have utensils that were finished in a state of ritual purity. Right? So both says, so again, in this case over here, the kli was completed in a state of tara, which means I was careful, bepashtus, that it should not come in contact with any source of tumah. It still requires immersion before being used for kodesh. Right? Kelim had nimar v'tara tzrichin tefila lekodesh avalo l'truma. Good. So we'll say let's analyze. So the Gamrido man. So we'll say let's analyze this because this is a strange case. Because we'll say think about this for just a moment. What the Mishnah is saying is I'm making a kli, and I've been careful with it. I've been careful with the kli from the moment that it was finished. Because also remember again, a kli only becomes receptive to tumah when it's completed. Right? Before it's completed, it's not receptive to tumah. So I've been careful with this kli from the moment it's been completed. So therefore, it's never come in contact with any type of tumah. Yet you still have to immerse it before using it for kodesh. So the Gemara says, I don't understand. The Gamridu man, who's finishing the kli? Ilema de Gamrin hu chaver. If you're telling me that a chaver, who's someone who is vigilant with tumah and tara, finished the kli, lama lahu tvila. Why would it require immersion? Ela de Gamrinu ama aretz. Rather, it has to mean that an ama aretz finished the kli. If Amma Aretz finished the kli, is that called being completed in Tara? Right? So remember again, this whole sugi is all about, again, the fact that Amma Aretz is not careful with Tumah and Tara. So that couldn't be called Nigmar Matara. Amra Bar Shila, Amra Mastam Shmuli Olam, Digamrinu Chaver. This is fascinating. What's the case? The case is where a Chaver finished it. So Rabbi said, this is interesting. So a chaver, right? Chaver is someone who is well versed in the halachos of tumah and tara. So a chaver finished the kli, and he's been guarding. Literally, he watched the kli to make sure that it doesn't come in contact with any type of tumah. If that's the case, then why does it require immersion before being used for kodesh? Listen to this. Umishum tzinura da ama aretz dinafal. What are we concerned about? We're concerned about maybe some saliva, right? Some spittle, some saliva of an ama aretz that may have fallen on the kli as it was being fashioned, right? As it was being fashioned. Now watch this. To which the Gemara says, emas. So the nafal emas, right? So ultimately, again, when did the saliva fall again? I remember again, what's the problem with saliva? What's the problem with saliva? Well, saliva of an Amma Aretz is tameh. Because an Amma Aretz himself generally is treated to a certain degree almost like a zav, right? So therefore, again, his saliva is going to be tameh as well. So let's analyze this. When is his saliva problematic? Or I should say, when is his saliva falling on the kli? So ilema mikame deligmere. If you want to say it fell on the kli before the kli was completed, so the Gemara says, ha lav manahu. That's not a problem, because what we just said before, a kli is only receptive to tumah when it's completed. So if you have saliva of an amaris that falls on a kli before the kli was completed, that's not a problem at all. Ella basar degamre. Rather, it must be the saliva fell on the kli after the kli was completed. That can't be either, because misir zahirbu. Most remember again, if you have a chaver who's making this kli, the chaver is careful about what? Amma aretz saliva, right? He's careful. In other words, again, I will say that means to be a chaver, right? If you're a chaver, you're careful with this stuff. So it can't be that he's just going to allow the saliva of an amma aretz on it. I will say to which the Gemara says the olam mikamei digamre. Rather, what's the case? The cases where there's the possibility that the saliva fell on the kli before the kli was completed, the dilma be'idna de gamre adayin lochihi. I will say we reminiscent of what we had 2 days ago, right? By the case of the woman who was fashioning the kli as well. What are we concerned about? The saliva. See, I will say before the kli is completed, and the chaver doesn't have to be as vigilant guarding the kli from an ama aretz for one simple reason: the kli is not ready to kabel tuma before it's completed. But maybe some saliva of the ama aretz. I will say, I mean, you think about this, by the way. Just like when a person speaks, some saliva comes out. So ultimately, again, it could be the case where, but the kli was not fully formed. Some of the saliva of the ama aretz got onto the kli, and it was still moist at the time that the kli was completed. And I will say that could be a potential problem. Now, again, I will say, to be clear, understand the only situation in which we're choshesh for this is where? Kodesh. So again, remember that's the common theme over here. This entire Mishnah is all about chumras for Kodesh, and that's exactly what they are. They're chumras, right? They are heightened levels of behavior that we are obligated to exhibit or to engage in for the sake of items of highest sacrificial sanctity. But again, that's exactly what this is. Chumras. Even for Truma, this doesn't apply. Right? So remember again, a kli for Truma, all you need to do is just immerse it and just use it. It's only for Kodesh that ultimately I'm obligated to immerse it before using it. To which the Gemara says, interesting, Tvila in Herav Shemesh Lo. So it sounds like from the Mishnah, all I'm obligated to do is immerse it in the mikvah. Right, but it does not require hair of shemesh. Right, so both remember again, all I need to do sounds like. So again, let's just play this out. What are we concerned about? The amar is fashioning the kli. Sorry, the chaver is making the kli. Some of the saliva got on the kli, possibly before the kli was finished, remained moist after the kli was finished, and therefore, in order to go ahead and just make sure that this kli is fit for use for kodesh, what do? Immerse it in the mikvah. That's all. Just immerse it before use for Kodesh. To which the Gemara says, interesting. So all you need to do is immerse it, but you don't have to wait for nightfall. Right? So again, I want to use it on a Friday. So all I do is I immerse it in the mikvah, and I can use it for Kodesh that day. I don't require hair of shemesh. Now this is interesting. To which the Gemara says, Masnisin delo ki Rabbi Elazar. So our Mishnah obviously does not reflect the view of, Rabbi Eliezer. The Gemara says, listen to this. This is fascinating. This nan, shvoferes shechatcha lechatos. So we'll say, here's an interesting case. Shvoferes, we'll say, is a tube. So this is incredible. How do they transport ashes of paraduma? You would take a tube, a reed. You cut down a reed, hollow out the reed. The reed is actually naturally hollow, but hollow it out a little bit more. Put the ashes inside of the reed and transport it like that. I mean, you could transport however you want, but that's the case here. So I cut down a reed to use it ultimately to transport ashes of paraduma. So what's the halacha? So the Gemara says, Rabbi Eliezer Omer Yitbol Miyad. So Rabbi Eliezer says, we'll say, look at Rashi. Yitbol Miyad. Shekol tashmishi para suyim bekli hamakabel tuma tu'unin tvila v'kodim sharev shimsha yishtam b'shel paraduma. We'll say, by the way, this is a little bit of a throwback to Maseches Yuma. Do you remember again Yuma Daf Beis Amud Aleph? Of course, right? So remember again, we had the whole sugi there of para aduma, right? And the idea of Beis Amud Beis already, Kli Gilalim, we had all of this. Para aduma had this fascinating situation where anything that's used for para aduma, we use for a tvul yom. Right? So remember again, the Kohen is going to do the paraduma with dafke metamehim, with tumas sheretz, then take him to the mikvah, it's crazy, take him to the mikvah, and go and have him do the service of the paraduma as a tvul. Remember again, a tvul yom is a person who has gone to the mikvah, but has not yet experienced sunset. Why do we do that? Remember again, why do we do that? Lahotzi, we're going to see this now. Lahotzi miliban shel tzdukim. In order to show the tzdukim there, because the tzdukim, those who did not believe in Torah Sheba'al Peh, said that a tvul yom is not permitted to do paraduma. To show that tzdukim were wrong, everything that's part of the paraduma process is a tvul yom. So that's what I was referencing over here. So Rabbi Eliezer Omer Yitbol. So Rabbi Eliezer says you have to immerse the reed tube. Because anything used in the service of the paraduma is immersed that day. is immersed that day and used before nightfall. Rabbi Yeshua Omer, Yitma v'achar kach yitbal. Rabbi Yeshua says, no, it's not just enough to go ahead and immerse it. What do you have to do? You have to be metameh. In other words, I will say, something is only called a tvul yom if it was what? Tameh. In other words, if you have a reed tube that just you cut down and you hollow it out and you immerse it, that's not called the tvul yom. You have to be metameh it and then you immerse it. And we asked, who's cutting down the reed? If you want to say that the chaver cut it down, why do I need immersion? After all, again, if the chaver's on cutting it down, the chaver's vigilant. Why do I need any type of immersion? And ultimately, again, it must be what? That an ama aretz went ahead and cut it down. To which the Gemara says, Baha, Leimale Rabbi Yoshua Yitma v'yitbal, Hatami v'kai. If that's the case that the ama aretz is cutting it down, Rabbi say, then what? Why does Rabbi Yoshua say you have to be metame the reed? If an ama aretz is cutting it down, then what? It's tame already. Just say it's tame and just immerse it. What's the case? The case over here is where a chaver, right? Tam tchacham cut down the reed. So if that's the case, what are we concerned about? We're concerned ultimately again, or I should say, we're concerned about again the saliva. Both say, apparently it's ama aretz saliva everywhere, right? So lemaisa again, we're just concerned about droplets of saliva getting on this reed. To which the Gemara says, I don't understand. Dinafal imas, right? When is the saliva falling on the reed? If you want to say it fell on the reed before the reed was cut down, that's not a problem. Halav manu. They both say it's not a kli. If it's not a kli, if it's not a utensil, then ultimately the saliva poses no problem. Ve'ela basar dechatcha. It must be after you cut down the reed. But after I cut down the reed, says the Gemara, mishar zohir ba. Ultimately, again, a person is going to be concerned about it. In other words, I will say after it's cut down, it's a kli. After it's a kli, bepashtos, the chaver is going to be very careful. To which the Gemara says, you're right. In reality, we're concerned about the saliva falling on the reed even before you cut it down. And what's the problem? And I will say the concern is because maybe, even though the saliva fell on the reed before it was cut, before it was detached, perhaps the saliva will still be moist even after it is detached, and therefore can go ahead and convey tumah. So therefore, again, a parallel machlokes. Again, just to point out over here, so remember, our Mishnah was talking about a case of kelin shnigmru b'tara. You have a kli that was fashioned and fully formed and completed in a state of ritual purity. Yet the Mishnah said what? What are you obligated to do? You have to immerse it before using it for kodesh. Why? What are we concerned about? We're concerned about saliva of an ama aretz getting on the kli when? Before it's completed, but yet still remaining moist after it's completed as well. To which the Gemara just points out, interestingly enough, this same discussion is occurring by the reed tube for the para aduma. To which the Gemara says, Bishlam Rabbi Yoshua, Hainu di'ika keril stukin. So according to Rabbi Yoshua, so now we're transitioning for a moment to para aduma. So remember again, by para aduma, here's what I had. I cut down a reed tube in order to go ahead and use it to transport the ashes of the para aduma. So I have machlokes Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yoshua. What do I do with the two? Rabbi Eliezer says, immerse it in the mikvah. Rabbi Yoshua says, no, you can't just immerse it in the mikvah. What do you have to do? You have to make it tameh and then immerse it in the mikvah. To which the Gemara says, Bishlam Rabbi Yoshua, Hainu Digei Kerlit Stukin. So Rabbi Yoshua's position makes sense, right? Rabbi Yoshua says, make it tameh and then immerse it. That makes sense. Why? Because that is repudiating the position of the tzedukim. Because what did the tzedukim? This now, because we're under the Mishnah, mitamin hayu es hakoin asarif es hapara. Right? I will say they would go ahead and here you can see Yuma Beis and Medalef. Mitamin es hayu es hakoin hasarif first Mishnah in Yuma. They would purposely be mitame the kohen who was burning the paraduma. They would purposely be mitame. I will say lahotzi miliban shel tzedukim in order to repudiate the position of the tzedukim. Shayu omrim b'mar ove hashemesh haisa nasis. So remember again, the tzedukim held that paraduma could only be done after Ha'er of Shemesh, because they did not believe in Torah Shabbat Peh. we know, based on drashas, that Allah Lamaisa, even a Tvul Yom, could do paraduma. So they'd purposely be metame the Kohen, again, as with too much sheres, we'll see. They'd purposely metame him, take him to the mikvah, and let him do paraduma even before sunset. So the Gemara says, so according to Rabbi Yeshua, this makes sense. So therefore, what would they do with the reed? According to Rabbi Yeshua, they would be metame it. Right now it's tameh. Take it to the mikvah. Now it's a Tvul Yom, and use it even before sunset. El Rabbi Eliezer. I amrit bishlama ba'alma ba'inan herav shemesh. Hainu di'ika kerulet stukin. So we'll say, according to Rabbi Eliezer, I don't understand. Halacha l'maisa, if you hold in general that kelim require herav shemesh before being used, then fine. Then there is a repudiation of the position of the tzdukim. So the Gemara says, Ella I amrit ba'ama lo ba'inan herav shemesh. But in general, halacha l'maisa, again, you don't require herav shemesh. That again, kelim that are finished b'tara can be used immediately. Then my haker l'tzdukin ika. Then at the end of the day, how does his approach repudiate the position of the tzdukim? Amarav, Amabeis, Rav says, Aso kitame sheretz. So ultimately, again, they made it like tumas sheretz. Now we'll say, now what does that mean? Take a look at Rashi. Tab Rashi Chav Gimel Amabeis says Rashi, Asu kitame sheretz. The olam ba'alma lo by herav shemesh Rabbi Lazar lekelim haligmar betara. In reality, I will say, in general circumstances, Rabbi Lazar does not. When you have kelim that are finished betara, Rabbi Eliezer does not require herav shemesh before using them. Va'afilu hachi ike kera lefi sheshvovere shalchatas aso ki'ilu nagan b'sheretz le'inyan minyan rishon v'sheni hilchach ilav de paranasis b'tvula yom ha'isa tzricha herav shemesh. I will say this is fascinating. The Gemara suggests that according to Rabbi Eliezer, this tube, this reed tube being used for paraduma, Chazal made it like it came in contact with the sheretz. They endowed it with sheretz tuma. And therefore, again, Abba say, therefore, once you take it to the mikvah, you've taken care of the sheretz tuma. It's a tvul yom, and it's okay for use. So I'll say, so again, just understand the incredible chiddush over here. We're gonna delve into this a bit. So according to Eliezer, it's not tamei. It's not really tamei. But they made it like it's tamei, right? They endowed it with tumas sheretz. To which the Gemara says, okay. So if that's the case, elamei ato lo tetame adam. So I'll say if that's the case, that they only made the reed like tumas sheretz, then lamaisa again it should not convey tuma to a person. If that's the case, alamatanya chotcha umatbila ta'un tvila. Right? So ultimately, we'll say, if that's the case, then why does it say that the person who cuts down the reed has to what? Has to go to the mikvah as well. Quite fascinating. Right? Look at Rashi. Elame ata de lo asua ela kitame sheretz lo titma adam. Daha tame sheretz lav avatumahu ve'eno metame adam. She'lo matzinu tuma le'adam le'kilim anogim be'tamei shekibel tuma me'achirim chutz mitame meis. So we'll say, if that's the case, that according to Rabbi Eliezer, the chiddush over here is that Chazal said when you cut down the reed to house the ashes, Chazal conferred upon it a level of tumas sheretz. Well, tumas sheretz doesn't convey tumah to people, right? If that's the case, then the person who touches the reed shouldn't become tamei. Here's the problem. The problem is the Brisa says the person who cuts down the reed has to go to the mikveh as well. So we'll say, watch this. Ve'ela, this is really fascinating. Asua kitame meis. Wow. They made the reed like tumas meis. So we'll say this is a gzeira. It's a gzeira. They made the reed like tumas. Rashi says tuma meis kilu nitma b'meis shemetame ba'adam. They made the reed like the reed has to say. Now again, remember, what did this reed do? What did this reed do? Nothing, right? Remember, according to Rabbi Eliezer, this is it's a gzeira. It's just a conferred tumah. It's not an actual tumah. It's a conferred tumah. They conferred the status of tumas meis upon this reed. And that's why halacha l'maisa, you have to immerse it. And that's why if you touch it, you have to go to the mikvah as well. Well, one second. Ihachi, if that's the case, that you're telling me that this reed has the status of tumas meis, tibay hazos shlishu shvi. Oh, 1 second. Tumas meis is something dramatically different. We'll say Tumas meis has a 7-day purification process with sprinkling of paraduma on days 3 and day 7. So what's going on over here? What are you talking about? If that's the case, it says chotcha umatbila ta'un tvila. So we'll say, what did the Brisa say? The Brisa said, when you cut down the reed requires immersion, and the person who cut down the reed also requires immersion. Tvila in hazaz shlishi ushvi'i lo. It only requires, right? So I will say, all it requires is immersion. Doesn't require sprinkling on days 3 and day 7. So what's going on over here? Ella, so again, I just want to point out all of this. So I'll say, right now, what we've done is we've totally focusing on the position of Rabbi Eliezer. Because according to Rabbi Yoshua, we have no problem. According to Rabbi Yoshua, we're mitame the reed to masheretz and immerse it like that. We're trying to figure out, according to Rabbi Eliezer is saying that Allah Lamaisi, you don't have to be actively mitame the reed. You just go ahead and immerse it. But we'll say, in order for this practice to repudiate the position of the tzdukim, the reed has to be tameh. So how is the reed tameh? To which the Gemara suggests that according to Rabbi Eliezer, something amazing. According to Rabbi Eliezer, Chazal conferred tumas meis upon the reed. Right? The reed is considered to be tameh tumas meis, therefore the reed has to be immersed, and the person who cuts down the reed. But I don't understand. If the person who cuts down the reed is touching the reed, and the reed has conferred tumas meis has a 7-day purification process. How is simply immersing in the mikvah enough? To which the Gemara says, listen to this. Ella, this is wild. Ella suah ketame meis b'shri shalo. We'll say, watch this. They made the reed tameh tumas meis, but like Tumah on the 7th day. Tumah on the 7th day. So they applied to the reed 7th day Tumas Meis. Now we'll say something on the 7th day of his Tumah. What does it require? What does it require? Just immersion. By the way, it's assuming 7th day after you sprinkled, right? So after you did your 3rd and 7th day sprinkling, they conferred upon it Tumas Meis of the 7th day after the sprinkling occurred, which means all it requires is immersion in the mikvah. Okay, to which the Gemara says, I'll tell you the problem with this. Vatanya we learned, Me'olam lo chidshu davar b'para. We have a general principle that Chazal did not make any chidushim by paraduma. In other words, we'll say, what that means, look at Rashi. Right across from Rashi, the Gemara says, "Lo chidshu davar b'para afapi she'asuba milas harbe b'shal zilzul shayba mitamin koina sarfala asosat v'yom lo chidshu b'gzeres al zar." Listen to this very quickly. Chazal, as much as Chazal were machmir with paraduma, they did not invent new levels of tumah, and this sounds like a new invention of tumah. To which Abaye shelo amru kardum tame moshka. For example, Abaye says no one ever said that a shovel becomes tamei tumas moshav. Both say what's tumas moshav? If a zav sits on something. Right, sits on something, even if he doesn't have direct contact. Let's say he sits on a pile of cushions. The entire pile becomes tameh. But I will say tumas moshav only applies to something that you normally sit upon. For example, if a zav sits on a shovel, the shovel does not contract tumas moshav. Kidisanya, vayoshev ala kli, vayoshev, right? The pasuk says, zav sits on a kli, it becomes tamei tumas moshav. Yachol kafa sa'ah v'yashav tarka v'yashav yei tamei. You might have thought that if you take a measuring utensil, sa'ah is measuring utensil, tarka is measuring utensil, and you overturn it and you sit on it, then it will become tamei. Tamun lobar vayoshev ala kli asher yeshev alav yitma. Mishem yuchad liyeshiva. Yotza zeh she'omrim lo amod v'na'aseh melachtenu. See, Rabbi say, interestingly enough, Tumas Moshav only applies to something that is normally fit for sitting. So, for example, to say that Tumas Moshav should apply to a shovel that the Zav sits on, Rabbi say, that's a Chiddush. That's a Chiddush. So, what the Gemara is suggesting is as follows. That halacha l'maisa, when we say that Chazal don't invent new levels of Tumah, that's invention of things that don't exist. What they can do are manipulate categories that already do exist. So, for example, Abosai, the ability to say, according to Rabbi Eliezer, the ability to say that the reed has the Tumah status of Tumas Meis of day 7 after the sprinkling has occurred, which means all that it requires is what? Is Tevila, is not a new category of Tumah. is just simply a manipulation of an already existing category. That Chazal are allowed to do. Creation of new categories, you can't do. Ultimately, manipulation of existing categories, you can do. And therefore, I will say again, it turns out that in the Machlokes Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yoshua, that ultimately, again, you have Rabbi Eliezer saying that Allah Lamaisa, you don't have to actively be metame to read. Why not? Why not? Because Chazal conferred upon it a level of Tumas Meis already. What level of Tumas Meis? 7th day after the last sprinkling, all that's left is immersion. Immerse it. You could use it that day because we want to use a Tvul Yom for a Paraduma in order to repudiate the position of the Tzdukim. Rabbi Yoshua, on the other hand, saying no. When you cut down the reed, you have to be Matamiyat. How are you Matamiyat? Be Matamiyat with Tumas Sheretz. Ultimately, again, then immerse it in the mikvah and halacha l'maisa use it that day once again to repudiate the position of the tzdukim. That even a tvul yom could be used for paraduma bosai. We'll stop over here. Shkoyach. All right, have a wonderful day, everyone. A good Shabbos on Zoom. Thank you.